Welcome Shri Yuvan Aves and Srimati Miriam Joseph.
Morning, everybody. Yuvan, hi. Okay, so as we sit on a beach, I want to introduce this most amazing book, which, as I told Yuvan earlier this morning, I wish had been written when I was a child, so that I would have been introduced to these ideas as a much younger person, because they are important ideas. The word intertidal, when I got this book, I did not know what the word meant. And Yuvan explains it very beautifully. But intertidal means that space on the beach where the tide comes in and the tide goes out. So it's an ever-changing space. And I love that. I love that that's the title of the book. Yuvan Aves, as the lady introduced him, is many things. He wears many hats, all of them equally well. He is a writer, an incredible writer. He's an educationist. He is a naturalist. He is an activist. And he's a nerd, in a real sort of biological, animal, living world, nature nerd. And we need more people like him. So I'm going to get into the questions. The first thing I wanted to ask you, Yuvan, is really, what drove you to write the book? What drove you to put this down on paper?
Check. Can people hear me? Yeah, I think so. I mean, just before I answer that question, I brought something with me. This morning, I was on this very lovely beach, walking with about 30 children from Daffodil School. And we were looking at peacock mussels, ghost crabs, how beaches form and things like that. Before we started the show walk, I said something blasphemous and the children looked at me. What if I had your great-grandmother in my pocket? What? What I meant was I have a fossil. This is about 400 million years old. It's a fossil of a trilobite. When all the oceans were together, these guys roamed in billions. Till fish evolved jaws. So, I mean, when we are speaking about the ocean, I carry this around just as a sort of witness and presence. What drove me to write this book was I was engaged in a movement against a port which would erase a large part of the waterscape of Chennai. And this was a 6,111 acre port proposed by the Adani Group. And this was coming on the river which birthed Chennai. You know, cities are birthed by rivers. And a river called the Kosasthalayar River births Chennai. And the port was on the river and its floodplains, and it jutted out about 2 kilometers into the sea. And one of the things we were finding were that these spaces were invisibilized. You know, the function of this waterscape, or what lived there, who lived there, these were not in the popular imagination. So like any city, Chennai is split into its sort of urban sprawl and the places which are sacrificed for the urban sprawl. This was very conveniently done in Chennai by the British. The north is called the Black Town. All our 37 lethally polluting industries are set there. And all the IT companies, the big apartments and the resorts are in the south. So it began from an exercise of evoking the north to the south and writing about the creatures and the people and the landscapes beautifully, and then carried on, yeah.
So this book is written in the form of a diary, not a sort of daily entry, but sort of sporadic entries over the period of 2 monsoons, I think. 3 years, 2 monsoons. And what's wonderful about that form of writing is that Yuvan does not limit himself to one theme. He can literally bring anything into it. And considering that he wears so many hats, he brings lots of things into it. One of the interesting things he does through the book is he has a series of 6 meditations. Now, we have an idea of what meditations are, but Yuvan's meditations are very specific. They are about us as human beings sitting down to take the time to think about nature around us, about water, about trees, about difference, about otherness and other people, other creatures. This idea of difference, entering, you talk about entering difference, entering otherness. I mean, it's a really simple idea. Can you explain to me why you chose to talk about that and why you chose to have a meditation around that?
There's evolutionary theory which in some sense runs opposite to Darwin. Not opposite, sometimes adjacent in some places it counters Darwin. And that's a really nice explanation of otherness. It's called symbiogenesis. And the world as we see it was made by collaborations of utterly unlike species of friendships coming together. And we have a lot of examples of this. In the ocean, for instance, this morning we found fragments of bleached coral. Coral was formed by algae and another species called zooxanthellae sort of coming together and saying, you know what, let's try and live together. Otherness, I think is the birthing of newness in creativity. If we look at forests, for instance, forests took over the world when trees and fungi under the ground said, you know what, can we work together and do something? All the seeds we eat came about when flowers and insects said, is there a way we can live together? That sort of vision of otherness is easily translated into human beings. In Kerala, you had the Silent Valley movement, one of the most successful movements, anti-dam movements there is in India. And a big strength, and Ram Guha writes about this and others say, is because there were all kinds of people involved in it. There was art in it, there was political angles to it, there was media coming in, and I think that's the sort of potential otherness allows. And if we can, often, it's a counterintuitive way of thinking about difference. Differences often divides, but then when there is an intertidal space between that, I think that is where creativity comes about. Yeah.
I want to read just 2 lines from this meditation right at the end. And this is a meditation during which Yuvan urges you to think of yourself not as a human, and then to think of yourself as a human, and then to kind of move into another space. And this last line is incredible. He says, become conscious through feeling your living body. The difference is a necessity for all life and your life, and that the earth holds together an uncountable number of ways to live, to perceive, and to be, each so utterly different from the other. It brought me to tears, because it kind of showed me that there is more joy in difference than there should be fear, and most of this book does that, which is why I love the book so much. Another thing that Yuvan talks about in the book is, you know, the act of observation, the act of just stopping to stare, to look, to see, to perceive, and to observe. And how walking as human beings, using the legs that we're born with, to do that, to engage in the act of walking and observing. Tell me why that's important, especially for people who live in cities, in urban conurbations.
All of us have our own unique practice of observation. Entities enter our perception, and then there are those which either conditioned or learned to filter away. And it's useful to think about what our practice of observation is, and in fact search for blind spots. There's this book called Biology of Belief by this man, a neuroscientist, Bruce Lipton. He has I love, there's a whole spread of a page with a dot on it, and you're wondering what it is. And he's like, that's how much sensory data is coming into your head, and that dot is how much you're conscious of. And I mean, we can move around that dot. Something about, certain kinds of seeing, perceiving, invisibilizes what is essential. You know, if I'm sitting under that tree, it is arduous to sort of acknowledge the fact that, okay, that is giving me shade, you know. An existence under that tree is possible because of its foliage. Or the fact that this, the wind, of course, the wind I'm feeling is from the fan, but if I'm a little bit there, the fact that the waves and the sea offer that wind, and that sort of acknowledgement is arduous. In the same way, we might not acknowledge certain kinds of people for, making this an existence. If I might tell a quick story which comes to mind. A principal of my school, where I studied, my school was part of the Krishnamurti Foundation, and at that time it was a forest in the center of the city. My principal, his name was G. Gautama. He was a great thinker and a very, very angry man also. And I was sitting and eating one day in the lunch hall with 400 other students, and he calls me, he says, hey, come here. And I've not done anything, I've behaved myself and all of that. And he's like, what are you eating? He's like, whatever, curd rice, dal rice, or whatever's on my plate. And he's like, do you know the names of who made them? I said, no, I don't. I mean, the kitchen staff. He's like, why not? Like, really angrily. He's looked at me as if I've committed sacrilege. He's like, why not? He's like, because nobody does. Then he gets even more angry. He's like, so what? Go and learn their names and come. So he just randomly sends me on this mission. I've gone into the kitchen. I've learned, gone and learned their names. I was like, thank you for cooking what I've been cooking. And at that time, I was traumatized, but I'm very grateful for that experience today. And we do that constantly. You know, if I'm eating, there is human labor, but there's also labor of the bee and the millipede. And why is it almost strange and inconsequential for that sort of radical acknowledgement to be there? Walking, or ways of slow movement, allow for that sort of radical acknowledgement. You have to meet, if you walked along this coast, you have to meet the egret. You have to meet the man with matted hair today, sleeping on the side. I don't know what he's gone through in life. You have to meet that. It is very easy to not notice. It is very easy to be caught in a dysfunctional pattern of seeing while moving fast. I think that's the sort of strange connection.
You know, you talked about your principle and what you learned when you were at the Pathshala and what the J. Krishnamurti Foundation schools kind of help children to do. And one of the hats you wear is as an educator of young people. You work in, I think, what you call nature-based pedagogy. You teach young children about their local environment, to engage with their local environment. Tell me why that's important.
You know, I run this organization called Pallavir Trust. We work with government. We do education as well as we do a lot of advocacy work, whether in court or in, public campaigns and so on. We use a pedagogy called the action pedagogy. And this, I was able to sort of vision and develop with the help of a professor called Louis Chawla, who works in Boulder University. And she has asked this single question in her life for the past 40 years. She wants to know, she sort of explored who becomes a steward for the environment. We go to the coast. We go to it consumptively. I'm relaxed. I'm having fun. I'm having an experience. And I come back. Beyond that, there is a very little relationality. I had a first-hand experience of this when a road was being built across, proposed to be built along one part of Chennai, and there were hundreds of people on the beach, and I wanted to collect signatures with some friends for the road not to happen because, turtles nest there, fisher folk live there. The people were unwilling to say, don't disturb me, It was a very difficult experience, having got just a few signatures that day. So the pedagogy, we sort of want to, what we are trying to do is, let's say I get 2 hours or 2 years with a human being, how does one make them a steward? Or even more, contentiously, how does one make them an activist? You're so, activism is having extraordinary love for that tree or for that coast. And when an axe or a JCB comes, one puts oneself in the middle, metaphorically or in other ways. So, we know that during childhood, we have our sensitive periods. Even other creatures have sensitive periods. The fact that a lot of our worldviews, values, belief systems takes, shape through childhood and also very, importantly in adolescence. So I think it's sort of world-shaping, world-changing, what young people experience in their lives. And so in our pedagogy, we do 3 things. And in anything we teach, we are never indoors. We are always out, whatever space allows. It could be a street, it could be a beach, it could be a park. Direct engagement is one. Local reality is another. And the third thing is the social, ecological, and political. We always try to mix it sort of pedagogically because they are separate in the mind, not on the land. And that sort of activates the young person to think, make connections and find forms of agency to, which is meaningful in that place. That's, yeah.
I like, there's the example you've spoken about of Vedatangal Bird Sanctuary. There's, I think probably one of the oldest bird sanctuaries in India is in Tamil Nadu. And there was I think there still is a pharmaceutical company that operates inside the bird sanctuary. And during COVID, while everybody else was busy with many other things, this pharmaceutical company wanted to expand their operations in this bird sanctuary. And what Yuvan and other local activists did, because at that time nobody could get out, everyone was locked in their homes. What they did was to galvanize all the young children they work with to draw art about this. And there was so much art made and so much attention given to that art and the media attention on it that made that proposal get killed. So the pharmaceutical company could not expand and continue to pollute. It also meant that the Tamil Nadu government, the new government that came in after that, said that that space will remain a bird sanctuary forever. I give this example because the other hat that Yuvan wears is as an activist. And he, along with his many, many fellow travelers in different groups in Chennai, have won several really important battles. And one of the battles was to stop the building of 2 large harbors on the Chennai coast. And I say this because we sit on a Kerala beach, a coastal state that is losing its coast at a rate that we are not actually thinking about actively. The Kerala coast is the coast with the single largest amount of erosion in the entire Indian coast. So what is it that we Malayalis need to be thinking about in terms of just saving our state, saving the physical land that we live on, stand on? What should we be thinking about?
So what Miriam referred to was the Vilinjam coast, which is, I don't know if it's north or south from here. South of here, okay. So for me, when I'm in Chennai, when I look at the beach, I'm like, that's the east. Here it's the west. But so there you have erosion, which is about, I think, 15 to 20 meters eating into the coast every year. And erosion works strangely. You know, to sort of very simply put it, there is a current which flows along the coast from north to south in Kerala, and it's moving metric tons of sand every day. If you block it with, let's say, a training wall of a port, sand is deposited on the north and it's eroded on the south. So below Vilinjam, so you have your Bhimapalli, you have Shankamukha, all of these coasts, all those villages are nowhere to be found. They're completely eroded. One of the reasons I think, I mean, there are some very extraordinary and successful campaigns in the past in Kerala, which is not to make a statement about Kerala's activism, but I think one of the sort of shortcomings of that was it was only the fisherfolk speaking. And their political power, their voice, and lack of it could not move the needles enough. You needed you needed a campaign where all kinds of people were involved, especially the privileged and people from urban areas who can sway politicians, who have access to authorities. That was not really strong in the sort of movement around it. It could happen. In March, it is possible that the Vilinjam port expansion can get its sort of final nod into its second and third phase. I hope a lot of noise is made against that. Yeah.
I mean, the people of Kozhikode, while we are sitting here, should think seriously. Yours is a city that sits on the sea, and if every year 20 meters disappears, in a few years, this festival can't happen here. In a few years, some of the oldest buildings built in this country will disappear. And soon, the people who made Kozhikode their home will have to find other homes. And this is the same up and down the coast in Kerala. So like Yuvan said, more of us need to be getting involved. I want to talk now a little bit about the language in this book. I called Yuvan a nerd at the beginning, and when I started reading this book, the first chapter was really difficult to read because suddenly I was met with names of birds and bees and crawling coastal animals that I'd never heard of and were difficult to pronounce. And I was like, okay, is this just a science book? And it isn't, right? As you go further into it, you realize that what Yuvan is somebody who has an encyclopedic knowledge of the local land he lives on. And more than the knowledge, he has a love for it. He has a connection to it. And that connection and love is what makes chapter 2 and 3 and 4 something that then this book becomes a page turner. It becomes something you engage with. It's also after a really long time that I had to have a dictionary next to me while I read a book. I consider myself, with someone who has a reasonably good vocabulary. You have taught me so many new words, it's incredible. And just for that, you should read it. Now, when I say all this, you might think that this is a difficult book to read. And I think what's most amazing about this book is that Yuvan addresses really potently important issues in the simplest of languages. And I guess that comes, one, from his love of what he speaks about, but two, because he's a person who teaches children. He knows how to make ideas simple. Something that scared me. I want to read this. Again, you know, it's difficult to talk about this book without sort of swinging from hope to despair to fear and back to hope again. But there is this bit I want to read, which is about pesticides. And again, I'm going to read only a tiny bit, but Yuvan's talking about the nature of water, you know, what we do to water, what we put into water, how water behaves. The ocean spoke immediate meaning into this, and currents swirled in my mind, volts running down my back, as if something massive and mystical had just shown a vestige of itself and then disappeared. Water is a great metaphor for consciousness. It is almost consciousness itself in the way it inextricably unifies and manifests. Post-humanist feminist Astrida Neymanis says, water lends us transcorporeality. Again, a word I had to check in the dictionary. She writes that while a dominant Western oculocentrism suggests that bodies are and should be separate and discrete, water is in fact digging stealth channels through us all. This connection may be immediate and direct or delayed and removed, but it nonetheless reveals itself as a thread of interpretation and commonality that facilitates an embodied hydrocommons. Now, this is the bit that's interesting for all people who use pesticide or think about pesticide. The premise of pesticide is based on a view of separateness, a dominant but false view. But the water cycle will make sure through its transcorporeal world making that glyphosate, which is a very poisonous pesticide, enters all our cells too, along with the cells of the fish and the osprey and the bee and the worm. It will show us that the individual is a cultural construct that water does not agree with. So it really doesn't matter what we do. Nature has its way of making itself known, felt, and what we do makes itself felt in nature and on our bodies. And this idea of we can take an action and that we ourselves are separate from it is something that hit me really hard. You didn't start out as an activist. You started out as a nature lover. In your activism, and you've now won 2 or 3 very important battles, you carry on fighting very many with a lot of other groups in Tamil Nadu. Tell me what that's taught you about the human being. Human being.
About the activism
the individual.
Oh my God, okay. What has activism taught me about the human being? If I might, go back to that view of separation, and I think seeing people, living beings as separate is another practice of observation. And one of the big driving forces of activism is to complicate that. So sometimes as an activist, as activists, we are trying to change the stories people see with. And sometimes it's the mind space which needs a lot of work. that would be a big learning, you know. What does one do? What can we put together so that 10,000 people care about something? With Vedandangal, the most important thing was children make art to save a bird sanctuary. And it came about because I had been taking children there among so many other people, almost 7-8 years to the sanctuary. And when this sort of pharmaceutical industry wanted to expand it, it was from the children, you know, the sort of driving force came to. And there the mind work had been done. They were like, for them, the nesting birds were kin. And therefore you had to take action. You know, if you and I are related, something is happening to you, I will stand in the way. Yeah, that's one very key learning.
So what is it about adults that makes us forget our kinship with the natural world? Is that too political a question?
There's so much going on in that question. What is it about adults? I think one of the things is how we experienced the world as young people solidifies and stays. However, in multiple campaigns, what happens is that hundreds of parents are part of some sort of campaign work. They're saying, let me do this, you know, let me draft these paragraphs for you, let me do the research. And so when adults have children, quite starkly, they're newly worried about the world. And there's a sort of second birthing which happens, which is a good thing, yeah. But what has happened to adults is a difficult question to navigate. We'll move on from there, please. Yeah,
Okay. I want you to talk a little bit about climate change, right? Because again, I've been attending this festival for a while, and January is usually much cooler than this. Alle? We know that in January, Kerala is not very hot. But this month, it's really warm. And this year, it's really warm. Last year, it was very warm. How do we get ordinary people to think about what climate change is doing to us and what it was doing to their children? Because like you said, it's when they have children that they suddenly wake up to the fact that, you know, the earth and the natural world is an important thing.
We had Matthew Roxicall session. He's one of the world's best climate scientists. It is amazing that he's here, and I don't know if he has another session. I was in his previous session, and when people like him have showed that in another 10 years, temperatures will be unlivable in many parts of India, especially in the summer. The catch with climate change is its inability to invoke action, because often climate change is a rebound effect. There are local issues. It could be issues of wetland biodiversity, other kinds of things, land use change, which sort of congregate, sort of become this larger demon which comes back and hits us. With children, with young people, with people just getting concerned about the environment, climate change, I've found, is not a useful way to think about it. It's global. Climate by itself is a abstracted and average concept. Over 30 years is what climate is, you know, mean temperature measured over. A better way to think about it is through local realities. So one way is to look at Earth system boundaries. There are 9 of them. One of them is climate. And in fact, climate is one of the least impacted among the 9 Earth system boundaries. The worst impacted, in fact, is the biodiversity crisis. The sort of fabric of interconnected life which allows our existence and all other existence, it is really irrecoverable. It is somewhere. Surface water flow and groundwater, again, really far away. Chemical flows. So these are things which people can be moved by, can see face to place, and engage in actions which they can identify with. You know, we are talking about this beach. On this beach, olive ridley turtles come to nest. I mean, across Kerala, of course, but also on this beach. They travel from deep south in the Indian Ocean, almost 9,000 kilometers here. And to sort of engage with that species would be to sort of engage with a whole large oceanic web. Those are more meaningful ways of or let's say a road is being widened and there's going to be a whole, a lot of trees being cut. That is something people can engage with. You can say, okay, what was the State Highways Authority thinking? Are there alternatives? Those sort of things allow for action, which then can sort of let the individual journey into deeper and deeper environmentalism. Climate change is not a starting point.
You know, I've always thought climate change actually means very little. Why don't we call it something like nature's crisis, or something that actually conveys the really kind of scary situation that the planet is in, right? Is there a way for us to kind of change that and start talking in that language to young children?
Yeah. One of the reasons I feel is that all the, the big climate conclaves are funded by fossil fuel companies. Once you make it entirely climate, you make it about carbon. And then once you talk about carbon, you can offer techno fixes. It's very important to make the crisis not about carbon.
Yeah.
Then, because there is no techno fix to this. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no techno fix for losing your biodiversity, is there? Okay. I know I'm supposed to turn it round to the audience, but I have a couple more quick points I wanted to ask you about. I was watching an interview you did, I'm not sure where, but you quoted a gentleman called Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry, and you said, what I stand for, he said, what I stand for is what I stand on. How do you get people to understand how important that is? How do you kind of tell the children you're talking to what that means in real, everyday, day-to-day living for them?
It comes from direct engagement. So this morning, taking 30 children on the beach would have meant, in a very sort of deep sense, more than perhaps, just intellectually speaking about these things. There is some very good educational research showing that pure intellectual engagement with all these issues leads to nothing. But one direct experience, because we are so profoundly animal, and to see connections, to see relationality is instant there, in a way which is beyond, deeper than cognition. That has been the main way I've been taking this on, to take people to places. Yeah.
I know I read a couple of bits. Is there anything you would like to read from the book? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it to the audience. Okay. So, anyone in the audience with questions? The mic odko.
You started the conversation touching upon the alchemy of life itself, from asymmetric relationships between algae and a barrier, a coral system. Now my question is regarding, recently a French friend said, because of climate change, contemporary life is sort of a complex random algorithm. And Max Perus, the molecular biologist, said life is a genetic lottery. These all are interconnected. Even climate change is part of that genetic lottery by virtue of Anthropocene. So we are all part of a casino of fluctuations, fragmentations, etc. But even though we are interconnected, so how will we resolve this dichotomy of this shift, this schism between nature and individual? Where nature and individuals are in silos, not at all coordinating. That is the pivotal point of Anthropocene. So could you please elaborate?
So if I understand your question, you're saying climate change too could be a natural process. Is that broadly what he's saying? Okay. I feel that might be a little lazy way to think about it, because I think climate change is very political. It comes from certain patterns of human relationality. I mean, it's very, very disastrous that the US, Trump has pulled out of the Paris Agreement. Not that they were doing anything earlier. It matters who does the science and who does the thinking. And we think with the spaces we are with. So there is a certain ideation and a solution making which comes from direct engagement with our landscapes and with sort of isolated desk work which generates ideas and policies. I think to look at climate change as natural, it's all natural, let's just sort of sit back, would come from a latter scenario.
Also, I mean, you said, the individual and nature are in two separate silos. That's fine, but for the longest time, the individual has sought to conquer nature, has sought to be above nature. And I think that's probably been slightly problematic in that nature has its own ways too of doing things. And like that bit I just read, you can put as much pesticide as you want, thinking you're killing bad bugs, but that pesticide leaches into the water that you drink and you kill this bad bug. I mean, so if we do not understand the interconnectedness, then we are doomed to kill ourselves as a species, I imagine. Anyone else? Any other questions? Otherwise, I can keep asking questions. Yes, over there.
Are our artists failing in communicating the danger to the public?
Are artists, just one more time, are artists failing to communicate this danger?
See, so long as humans lived, artists have somehow communicated the upcoming dangers to the common people. Like whether it is atom bomb or war of everything. Now, what about climate change? What are the artists doing?
Padma, can I invite you to quickly speak about the Jenny Holzer? Is that okay? Okay, I have a friend here from the Philippines. She's a fantastic writer, poet, anthropologist. She's done some extraordinary artistic work around climate change. So, yeah.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting this, but I wouldn't say that artists are failing, but I will say that we haven't done enough. Yuvan mentioned Jenny Holzer. She's a New York artist, and a lot of her work is to put up text in neon lights on buildings. So during COP26, when it was in Edinburgh, we worked with her to have poets from the global majority to have their poems on their personal experience of climate change projected on buildings throughout Edinburgh while the negotiations were going on. And we had some lines written by Yuvan projected on the venue of COP26. So there are these kinds of interventions that artists can and should be making, but it's not enough to just make art. about climate change. I think we can all learn from Yuan's example and this Filipina poet that I love to quote. She says, "There's something wrong with the movement if all it produces is more poetry." So there has to be more action beyond just the art. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Anybody? No? Okay. So now I want to talk to you about, you write a lot about sitting on your balcony and listening to 20 different kinds of frogs or watching 5 different kinds of bees and what they do. So while reading your book, I live in a very green, non-urban part of Kerala, and I tried to listen. And I don't know if it's because my ears are old, but I can't tell. I mean, I can tell the difference between a frog and a cricket, but frankly, one bird sounds like another to me, mostly, right? What does it take to actually understand who we're listening to, what we're listening to, and how that changes?
Another very powerful teaching experience I've had is, my team and I, we went around Chennai recording frog calls during the monsoon. We got about 12 species. And then we put that together, and this was during COVID. So we played it to primary school children. This is 4 to 6-year-olds. And played the calls. We asked them to mimic it. So there was this just screen full of people doing, kids doing noises and parents running into what's happening. And they learned it. The fact that the human capacity to relate and connect is extraordinary, and especially at that age. And then what happened was these children would sit through the night saying, ornate narrow mouth, common Indian toad, pug snout, things like that. So I think as adults, there is a solidification of what we are used to. And when working with children, you're constantly meeting potentiality. And also disrupted in one's own solidification often. I didn't answer your question, but that was like a bit of a response.
But, because I was curious. I was like, geez, this man can identify so many different species. I live in a place where I hear noises, and you see, that's the word I use for them. They're noises to me. I cannot tell one bird call from another bird song and I was just curious whether that was something you learned as a kid at Pathshala, or whether it's something I can learn now, an adult can learn to engage with and notice and be a part of.
I've learned a lot from, who we call indigenous people. That's a fraught word, but I very often go on snake walks with the Irula tribes, and they are listening to squirrels constantly, and they're like, not that. And then for a specific call, they'll say, hey, rat snake, it's seen a rat snake. Go search there, and they'll find it. So just the nuances of squirrel call. So for me, squirrel has 4 or 5 different calls. Okay, calling to a pair, slight alarm call, very, so vehement alarm call. But they're able to sort of listen to more deeper nuances. Some of the people who feature a lot in intertidal are, fisher folk. And they have a very fine-tuned feeling for wind. And they'll be like, there's a sort of 9-word wind language I constantly use through the book. And they'll say, the Kacham wind is blowing, I won't take my sardine nets today, and it'll be true. Or, I remember having this conversation with one of the fisher elders, Palemana. He was teaching me wind words. And I would get them wrong. And then he'll be like, listen, if you're some other guy, so I'm letting you. If you are another fisher folk, I'll beat you with a stick if you get to the, the words wrong.
Well, I imagine that if you got the
Yeah,
word
yeah.
for the wind wrong when you're out on the high seas.
Exactly,
It could
exactly.
mean life or death,
Exactly,
right?
yeah. So for him, it was attaching, you have to attach your fears to the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah, Palayamanna features a lot. I mean, you have a lot of teachers who teach you from just natural knowledge. These are not people who went to school, but these are people who went out onto the high seas when they were young children and have learned to read the different winds, the irlar, all the different people that you learn from. And we as a species have found it easy to dismiss that knowledge, right? And again, from a point of view of us humans and what we build is greater than what we do with nature. When you introduce, say, some of your kids to a Palayamanna, how does he interact with little children?
You see a very interesting collision of having a very specific idea of what learning is and means, and him having come from a different, or let's say, for instance, I was recently walking with the Paliyar tribes, learning about bees and how they're looking at, bees have this little basket on their hind leg. It's called the scope. They collect pollen, and they're looking at it and they're like, that's full enough. It's going to go back to the hive. Let's follow it. Versus, I'm like, what is happening here?
You can't even see the pocket.
Yeah. And it is, in such learning spaces, learning is highly polyphonic. It's not, it's not a monologue. It's not purely instructional. It lets all kinds of voices speak together. Is a very stark commonality. Yeah.
Is there any way that you can get or are looking to get the kind of teaching you do with children as part of a primary school curriculum across the state?
We tried to do that.
Okay.
The previous deputy commissioner, I don't know, I shouldn't be saying. Okay, we tried to do that, and there was interest earlier, and then people in the authorities changed with a totally different set of priorities, and now we are barely sort of in there in the government space, but then we are in there. But we were very close to implementing it in 400 schools, but did not, people changed by then, yeah. Yeah.
Let's go and find those people and start implementing it. I think, certainly Kerala would do well to have natural education with nature for little kids. This book, and I don't want to sound like a fan, but I think I am. I am a woman on the wrong side of 50, and I have never taken the time to look at or think about nature around me. And I think you've changed that quite radically for me, so I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm rarely moved by books. I'm a person who is a journalist and a filmmaker. I've worked in the center of mainstream commercial cinema. I'm about as cynical as they come. This book has changed many things for me. I would encourage all of you to go out to the bookshop and buy it straight away and persevere with reading it. And I understand there is a second intertitle coming.
No, so my next book is called Incendence, and it's...
Oh, it's called Incendence?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, that's my mistake. But this is a gentleman to read and follow, not just for his language, not just for his ideas, but also for his ability to change the way we look at the world around us. And I'm done with my questions, but I know you're somebody who has many messages to put out. So I'm going to leave the last 5 minutes of this session to you to talk about what you think is important for Kerala and our coast. I know you study the other coast, but what about the West?
Thank you, Miriam, for such a sort of generous and rich response to the book. that's a good place to end, you know. I'll just leave it at that, yeah.
We're going to end 6 minutes before time. I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for coming. And I'm going to say again, please go out and get a copy of this book. Thanks, Yuvan.
Thank you so much. Yeah.